Hey there YouTube, Artichoke Dip here, and welcome back. This is video 2 of Dungeon Creation. So, while I was waiting for my first video to process, and if you've watched that video to where I explain the differences between some of the areas that the game industry just likes to call a dungeon, it's a very vague word, I decided to draw up a quick illustration, basically the way that I imagine it, and I put it into my game systems, and maybe it'll help you guys. So as I'm explaining, you can see ruins, how I have it here. The walls are crumbled away and they're very thin in spots, no doors, it's all open, and it could be placed anywhere, whether it's above ground, subterranean. Compared to a stronghold that's got extremely thick walls. At this point they got siege towers as well, with ladders heading up into those areas. You can see horse stables right here, large entry gates. I got this area right here, which I focused on here, the stronghold inner, compared to a cave system. And then I have the mines over here, where you can see these are finished areas of the mines, where they're very well constructed, straight hallways that lead into these areas, and then it goes out into these areas which are recently being mined out and developed, and they're very crude and winding and so on and so forth, leading into wherever. And then how I like to do my keeps compared to my castles. Right here, here's my castle, and I'm focusing on this tower, where you see I got 1 through 6 levels in it. And then here, I got a quick little glimpse of the first area, first floor, first area. There are a total of 3 areas in here, with staircase that leads up to the next level, next one, and so on and so forth. And then here, I made a quick little 4-level wizard tower with this area showing you the first floor. There are 2 accessible areas, and the 2 areas which are secret and have to be found in order to access those to be able to go up to the next level. Compared to a labyrinth right here, as you can see, is very chaotic, lots of twists and turns and dead ends. And as I said in my first video, works really well with randomized tables. So now that you have decided, and I hope the first video will help you guys out a lot, and you decided what you want to put into your game and what you want to move through and the material that it's made out of to help add some challenges for your characters. Next thing we want to do is we want to start focusing on the interior and building that. So the first thing we're going to talk about are doors. So, doors, I have to admit, I love putting doors in and focusing a lot on doors inside my dungeons, and traps and locks and so on and so forth. But the first thing that you're going to want to do for your random table when you design doors is you're going to want to set some parameters for them. And once you get this out of the way and you get it rolling, at this point, you don't have to worry about going back through source books to find this stuff, because you're already going to have the information here for you. And depending on how you want to set them. So, typically, I like the way Dungeons and Dragons does it with their difficulty class. And normally they'll say DC, we'll say 15, and as you roll your attack dice with your weapon, if you meet or exceed that number, at that point, you can do, the door will be damaged from the weapon effect. And when it comes to a door, as your characters are beating away at this thing with whatever they're using, an axe or a sword or whatever, obviously the door is not going to parry or dodge, but that material is going to, at that point, have a certain resilience and durability to it. So how I like to do this is give it a small margin for damage at that point to occur. And it just adds more challenge into the game and makes it more interesting. So the first thing we're going to want to do, I'm just going to cross that out real quick, is we're going to want to focus on the 3 materials that I would normally find in my areas, and that would be wood, steel, and then stone. So we're going to have wood, steel, and stone. So let's figure out, and like I said, how I like to do this is I like to have a smaller margin. So I mean, it just adds more challenge into it. You don't have to do this. You can do it any way that you would like to do it. It's entirely up to you. I like to use the D100 system when it comes to this. So with wood, the difficulty class, or at that point when the weapon actually damages the material. So I'm going to say 50%. Steel, I'm going to set a little bit higher, actually way higher. Steel's going to be at 90%. And then stone's going to come in about 75%. So every time I roll the dice, and I really like the D100 system, I'm going to roll the D100, and if I get a 50 or above at that point, I should mark that so there's no confusion. I'll put these arrows. There we go. So we all know 50 or above, damage will occur to that wood. 90% or above, damage will begin to occur to steel. 75% or above, damage will start to occur to stone. So now, I want to assign some way at that point for it to reflect as the damage is being absorbed before this material breaks down and your characters at that point kick the door in and go right into those areas. So I'm going to do HP for your hit points. A wooden door, I'm going to give 10 HP to. A steel door at that point, I mean, it's steel. Yeah, we're going to go with about 50 hit points in order to get past that sucker. Like I said, I like the challenge, so that's the reason why I set mine a little bit higher. And then stone, I'm going to go with about 40. So as you can see, the way that I do this with my doors, and I'm going to focus more on doors here. When I'm done with it, I hope you guys get something out of this and you can add this to your dungeons. So with the wood, I'm going to, at that point, like I said, the door cannot parry or dodge unless it's a magical door, and that's a completely different subject. We're talking about just a regular door here. So I'm not going to waste the time to roll dice to see if my character can hit the door. If my character cannot hit the door, then my character's probably not going to hit anything else in the dungeon, and it's probably not going to last that long. So I don't use the 20-sider rolling to see the AC and all that. How I do that is I will roll the damage on that. When my character goes to knock down the door, I'll roll the damage and I roll a percentile. If I get a higher than a 50%, at that point that wood has occurred that much damage. So on and so forth. And the nice thing about it, particularly like with the steel door, it's got 50 hit points, and you're going to have a 90% or higher before the steel starts breaking down. So you're going to be there a while, and that only adds more into the game, because as your characters are making all this racket trying to kick down the steel door, what else does it attract that's nearby to come to see what the hell's causing all the noise? So once you get this framework dialed in, however you want to do it, you're going to want to keep that with your notes. Now you have a clear, concise, basically parameter setting for that material and what it's going to take to be able to knock that down to move on. The second thing we're going to get into, and you can either randomize this or you can at that point choose to, if you want to make a layout draw out a dungeon beforehand and you're detailing it exactly for your particular campaign, and then you can actually at that point decide what doors you want to put in there. But let's talk about some of the different door types. So the different types that we're going to deal with. Well, we're going to have a door, whether it be just a regular square entry door, a portcullis door, which if you let me get a portcullis door here so you can see this. Easier to show you than try to explain. So at that point, we could have a portcullis door, as you can see here, that slides up and down, allowing entry instead of opening in and out. Now, you could also have a sliding door. You could have a door such as like a large stone wheel that would have to be rolled out of the way, or that is on a mechanism that slides out of the way. However you foresee that in your mind, feel free to write that down and start building your own tables off of that. So for this video and this demonstration, I'm going to use square door, portcullis, a sliding door. Let me think of one more. Oh, why not a double door? So at this point, if I'm making a random table for myself, what I'm going to do is the first thing I am going to assign is the percentages of how common it is I'm going to run into a particular door type and door material. So I'm going to start with the door material. So the wood, I'm going to say, is going to be extremely common, and I'm just going to put 80%. So 80% of the time, they're going to find wood. At that point, I'm going to say 95% or above. Guess I should do this so we all understand. 80%, I got that arrow going the wrong way, or lower, 95% or higher, they'll come across steel. And then stone, I'm going to, at that point, I'm going to bring that in right around a flat 90% or higher. So right here, got it written up. The frequency that it's going to be encountered. We have wood 80% or lower, steel 95% or higher, and then stone 90% or higher. So as you can see, I've set my parameter to where wood's going to be the most commonly encountered material for a door. So the types of doors, I'm going to say the square door is going to go from 0, 1, all the way up to, I'm going to say 60%. 61 to, we'll say 80% will be portcullis. 81 to 90% will be sliding doors, and then 91 to 100% will be double doors encountered. So there we go. We have that. We got a material, what it's going to take to break through it, and how frequently these doors are going to be encountered. So now that we have that all set up, let's get into, at that point, locks. So you gotta make a decision. In your world, are your doors going to have locks, or is everything going to be unlocked? So if they're going to be locks, we're going to want to put a challenge rating for the type of locks that at that point your characters are going to encounter. So if we have a simple lock, a moderate lock, a hard lock, and then very hard. And let me see, simple locks, I'm going to say from 0, 1 to 70% will be simple. 71 to, at that point, I'm going to say 85% will be moderate. 86 to, I'm going to say 95% are going to be hard. And then 96 to 100% are going to be very hard, very difficult to get past. And that's how I do that. And that's that. That's how simple that is. And now we know what material the door is made out of, door type, and any locks that are on it, and how hard they are to get past. So that's doors. That's very, very easy way at that point to add doors into your system. And particularly if you're using For Against Darkness, where it gives you a great generator in here for your dungeons, but at that point it shows you doors, and it may cover some door types in here, but I much more prefer to have something like this because it's going to give me more information, and it's going to at that point allow my characters to interact with it more and just present more challenges. So let's give her a run through, and see what we come up with. So let's see what kind of door we get. So first thing is, it is made out of, what a surprise, wood. It is a double door, so it's a wooden double door, and I forgot to add one thing into the locks. If you want more randomness added to your game, when it comes to your locks, you can always put a percentile in here. You could go locks, and you can also add on an extra one that says locked and unlocked, which means the door has no lock. So you could say, let's leave it up to the 80%. We'll say 80% and lower are locked, 81% and higher are unlocked. So we had a wooden double door. Let's see if it's locked or unlocked. 75. It's locked. What kind of lock does it have on there? 85. It's a moderate lock. So, boom, there you go. And you can start filling your dungeons at that point with that and have that already ready to go. And it's going to add more into the game. Now, we have the whole entire door thing down. I mean, it's very simple, as you can see, easy to do. Think of the material you want to make it out of. Think of the types, basic shapes or mechanisms it's going to take to be able for them doors to open. Decide if you want to mix it up and have some doors that are locked, some that are unlocked, and then the hardness of the locks, how hard they are to get past them to be able to pick the locks. Next thing we want to get into when we go to design our dungeons are going to be traps. Traps are always fun, and I really love adding traps. Now, I have not been a big one for the use of like puzzles in my dungeons. I just really don't particularly care for puzzles a whole lot. And if I was playing in a large group, a puzzle would work out because it's something that could challenge everybody. But when you're playing solo, I just personally don't like them, so I don't put them in there. But let's talk about traps, shall we? And the different types of traps that we could come across. And I'm going to write these down and I'll hold it up to the camera for you guys to see. So we would have, if you think about it in the dungeons, some of the traps that you're going to encounter. First one that comes to mind, pit traps. Spiked pit traps. At that point, we're going to, we have pit traps, spiked pit traps. We're going to have floor spike traps, and how I foresee those are actual sharpened pieces of timber. When a mechanism is stepped on, they protrude from the floor up. So I'm just going to put post traps, and then one for floor, wall, or ceiling. Okay. Then of course we're going to have the old-fashioned arrow trap. And then a poison arrow trap. Alright? And then these areas, which obviously will be wall or ceiling. Then we're going to have fire trap, water trap, which will flood an area, we can do a magical trap, acid trap, and what am I not thinking of here? Ooh, monster ambush trap. And then that is net, cornered, magical, now what I mean by that is the monsters in this particular area have set up a trap for your characters to walk into so they can corral them to attack them to make it easier for them. But let's hold that up. As you can see, I got a nice little list of traps here. So now this is going to be real simple. When you, at that point, create a dungeon, and if you're just going to use randomized tables to do this, you can decide here whether you want it trapped or untrapped. If I'm going to, at that point, do a trap, here, let me say 96% or higher. No, that's too high. I'm going to lower that a little bit. Yeah, we'll say 76%. 76% or higher, it's trapped. And we'll say 75% or lower, it's untrapped. Now, when it comes to doing this part of it, it's pretty simple. I'm going to say pit traps are going to be the most plentiful, so we're going to say 0, 1 through 20%. 21% through 30% are going to be our spike pit traps. Post traps are going to be 31 to 40%. And then as far as this goes, the wall, ceiling, what I'm going to do is break that up into a 1d6. Evens, which are going to be 2, 4, and 6, will be the wall. Odds, which will be 1, 3, and 5, will be from the ceiling. Okay, arrow traps. So that's going to fall in 41. Well, I'll take that up to about 60%. And then a poison arrow trap is going to fall into 61 to 70%. Now, when it comes to wall ceiling, I'm going to do the same thing as I did with my D6 up here. Wall will be 2, 4, and 6. Ceiling will be 1, 3, and 5 on the 1d6. So 71 to 80% will be a fire trap. 81 to 85% will be a water trap. 86 to, at that point, I'm going to say 96% will be a magical trap. 97 to 99% will be an acid trap. And then 100% will be a monster ambush trap. And as far as what they're using, whether it's a net to try to capture all the characters together, whether they're going to corner them, or whether they're going to use magic to be able to try to, at that point, give them the upper hand in the ambush, I'm going to leave up to, at that point, a 1d8 to the side. So I write 1d8. 1 through 4 being a net trap. 5 through 6 being a cornered, and then 7 through 8 being a magical influence. And that's how simple it is. See, I got the trap parameter right there already set out and ready to go. So we got covered doors, we got traps. Now, And you could continue on with this and get more into depth with it however you see fit. But for me, this is pretty good. I mean, this is going to give your characters enough, at that point, punishment to keep you busy for a while. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go through and I'm going to assign damage. And I'm just going to put DMG because I know that's damage, not Dungeon Master's Guide, but damage. And pit traps are going to do a 1d6. Spike pit traps are going to do a 1d8. Post traps, I'm going to see a damage will be from the floor 1d6, from a wall 1d6, ceiling 1d8, arrow traps 1d6, poison arrow traps, say 1d6. Then I'm going to put versus save poison. And then below the poison versus save, I'm going to go with 16. So depending on the system you're using, it could be 16% or it could be 16 if you're using the D20 system versus save that poison. Otherwise, you get an additional 1d4 damage. Okay, poison arrow trap. And I went through, this is for the wall and ceiling, and I'm just going to leave that to those traps because there's an poison arrow trap. So fire trap, damage 1d8 fire damage for 1d4 rounds. Water trap damage, I'm going to, water traps can be a little finicky. If it's in a large open area, obviously your characters can swim through the water and they're not necessarily damaged at that point unless they're in a watertight room that fills with water and drowns them. So when it comes to a water trap, at that point damage, I'm going to put 1d4 and just underneath here I'm going to put, depending on environment. Magical trap damage, and I would go into a different subcategory with this for as far as magic goes, but for the sake of this video, I'm going to say 1d4, and underneath here there is a 70% chance to lose next 1d4 rounds. Alright. Acid trap damage 1d8. Monster ambush trap. So I'm going to write here damage as per monster. And then as far as the magical trap, same thing, I'll use the same thing up here for this one. 1d4, 70% to lose next round. Lose next 1d4 rounds, which is already. Alright. So we already have that done. And we have everything in here. This is going to be all the traps that at that point I can put into a dungeon. We got doors, we got traps. Monsters are not going to be one of those things I'm really going to cover. You know, how I would approach the monsters is in the frequency or how common these things are going to be encountered in your dungeon, just because there are so many different RPG systems out there. That's just going to be a whole entire confusing ball of wax, I think, for everybody to try to generalize all encounters in one randomized table. So monsters, how, you know, I would really suggest that you do that, particularly if you're new to RPG games, is typically all monster manuals, or whatever they call them, a bestiary or a monster manual. Typically, if you go in the back of the books, it's going to list the monsters by level, depending on the level that you're starting. Not all, but a lot of them in the descriptions will explain to you where you are going to encounter these particular things to be able to at that point stock your dungeon with. Let me get a really good description of this, and this will be out of the second edition of Advanced Dungeons and Dragons, and it's their monster manual, which I really do enjoy how they did this one compared to a lot of the other editions out there as far as monsters go. But it's really gonna help explain a lot. So let's just jump right into this bugbear right here, and this is why I say I'm not going to linger on this very long, but if you go through your encounters, it should tell you just like this. It says climate and terrain, any subterranean area. Frequency is very uncommon. Its organization is tribal. Its activity cycle is at any time of day or night. At that point, its diet is carnivorous, its intelligence is low to average, its treasure is individualized depending on the particular encounter, its alignment is always chaotic evil. Number appearing will be from 2 to 8. And of course it gives you the rest of the statistics from there on out for playing a particular game. But all of your bestiaries or monster manuals are going to have normally a table in there that are going to explain to you basically the frequency that you're going to see that encounter and what areas you will see that encounter in, whether it's a forest or, as an example of that bugbear, in a subterranean area, such as a dungeon. Okay, so we got traps done, we got doors done. Now, at that point, let's focus on a little bit more depth with our dungeons. And let's, at this point, if you really want to leave everything in a very randomized table, let's go a little further into movement. And what I mean by that is dungeon movement tables. So I'm going to pick out some ideas here that your characters can encounter that could encumber their movement. So first thing is, I'm just going to say muddy floors. half movement. I'm just going to put half move. Or you could have an area that a quarter of the map is flooded, which is going to, at that point, we'll say only 3/4. Now, how this is perceiving this, half means you can only move half. So if you can normally move 8 spaces, this is at that point going to knock you down to 4. Whereas if you can normally move 8 spaces, you're only going to be able to move 2. 3/4 is how I'm presenting that, so you understand that. So you could have muddy floors, you could have a quarter of it flooded, half flooded, or 3/4 flooded. And same thing. Boom, boom, boom down there for that. Okay. Now you, at that point, also could have fog in your dungeon. Ha 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 ha. So we could write down fog. And with that, you'd say spot search negative, we'll say 2. How's that sound? And then if you wanted to go further into that, you could. Heavy fog, very heavy fog, you know, pretty much they're trying to look through pea soup, however you want to do that. Now, we could go with loose gravel floors. And at that point, I'm going to say we got a negative 30% to sneak or move silent. Alright. Which some of the other areas that we could run into a dungeon that could cause us or create more interesting plays for your characters? Well, you could have, at that point, lava. I'm just going to put lava flows. And you could always put, there's always a 20% chance of burn damage. Alright. You could have ice on the floors, and at that point you could be knocked down to half movement. We could also go, we covered mud, floods, fog, loose gravel, lava flows, ice. We could also add in I'm going to put muck. Which, unlike mud, muck's the real sticky, ooey, nasty, swampy mess that just seems to make movement almost impossible. And we'll say 3/4 movement for that. Now, if you really wanted to add more into your dungeon, you could put all of these on a randomized table. So you could say 0, 1, we'll say to 40. Flooded. 41 to 50, 51 to 60, 61 to 70, 71 we'll say 75, you got fog. 76 to 80, we're going to have loose gravel. 81 to 85, you're going to have lava. 86 to, at that point, I'm going to say 95, you'll have ice. And then from 96 to 100, you got some nasty muck going on, inhibiting your character's movement through the dungeon. So as you can see, this is going to add a lot of more interesting aspects to your solo game, and it's going to bring more into it, and it's also going to give a place for your imagination to flourish, because not only do you know the location, the design, so now it's more than just a map. Now it's actually this living, breathing place, maybe in ancient ruins that you're going through, and you know a little bit of the story behind it. You know somewhat of what it's constructed out of. Now your characters may have to traverse some nasty conditions in order to get to these areas to achieve their objectives, which is going to add more challenges into it, but also it's going to allow your imagination to run a little bit more wild, because it's going to add more detail into it. So, stocking the dungeon, and we have the doors, we have the traps, we have the monsters, we have what the floor is like as they move through those areas and what inhibits them. So the next thing that we're going to want to cover and talk about is light sources in your dungeon. Believe it or not, so is there going to be natural light, possibly from holes that have been knocked through from the surface, and that sunlight comes through lighting up certain areas? Or are you going to have ancient ruin site to where 3/4 of it is above ground, so there's really no need? Or are you going to have luminescent stone? Stone will put off its own light source. Or perhaps are you going to have torchlight? Are you going to have lantern light? Or are you going to possibly have braziers throughout this area? And if you're not familiar with what a brazier is it looks like a brass, basically, bowl that is filled with oil, and it was lit, and it would burn and give off light and heat, and that's what a brazier was. So here's some ideas to think of how you're going to have light source in your areas, and how is it going to affect. So natural light, you may only have for possibly upwards to 12-hour duration. Whereas if luminescent stone could be constant. Torchlight is going to be dim, and it may only illuminate 15 feet per torch, whereas a lantern light will also be dim, but it may only illuminate at that point 20 feet. Whereas of a brazier, the brazier will be a little bit brighter, but it may only illuminate 30 feet. Now, if you want to randomize that a little bit more, of course, you could put this in at that point. You could say, and when it comes to light sources, I don't really like to randomize that. I like to put that in myself, knowing to add my own challenges, just because it may not make any sense. Particularly if you're going through a mine and at that point you roll natural light, well, unless you have dark vision, there's probably not going to be a whole lot of natural light, which is why I like to add this in as I do my dungeons. So, you know, in a dungeon, you're more than likely going to find lanterns. And so with lanterns, as you can imagine, as you're moving through those areas, every 20 feet is going to be lit in that area. Then until you get to that next lantern, it's going to start to, at that point, fade out into shadowed areas again, which helps add more of a challenge to your game. So I think, as far as this video goes, I think that'll give you guys enough to think about. You know, we covered the doors, we covered the traps, we covered locks, we've covered light sources. And like I said, as far, just for the sake of this video, as far as monsters go, when I stock my dungeons, how I go about doing that is, once you figure out what you want in your dungeon, we'll say, and so as far as monsters would go, let's say you want your dungeon to have 4, right? So we'll go with the first level dungeon here. So we'll say you're going to have a goblin, skeleton, orc, and let me think of one thing other. Let me see here. Let's think of we got a goblin, skeleton, orc. Ooh, what about a giant centipede? There we go. Okay, so let's say we decide to go with 4. Here's our 4 right here. How I would randomly generate these things is I would put the percentages on how often you expect to, or you would like to see these things encountered in your particular area. So if you wanted goblins to be the most prevalent, so let's say we would go 0, 1 to 80%. So 80% of the time you're going to run into these guys. 81, we'll say, to 86%, right, will be skeletons. 87 to, I'm going to say 94%, how does that sound, will be an orc, and then 95 to 100 will be a giant centipede. Now, how many do you want to appear in that particular area? We'll say goblins. Let's go 2d4. That'd be a good number. Skeletons. Skeletons are relatively weak, so we'll say 2d6. Orcs, I'm going to say they're a little bit more tougher, so we'll go 1d8. And giant centipede, I'll go 1 D4. So you can really randomize it that way. And, you know, depending on how you do your dungeon, some people may like to create the dungeon in its entirety before their characters go through it. And that's a good way to do it because you know exactly what's in every single room before you go through. Other people may like to do it as they build it. It's the way how I like to do it is my characters go through, I just roll on my random tables and start creating rooms and adding everything into it. So every room essentially is a surprise because I don't know what's in there yet. So this is a real valuable way of helping occupy those as you go along. It also works really well if you're the type of person that you want to lay out your dungeon beforehand and already have it built and ready to go, and you want to stock it. You can make your table and at that point assign these parameters, so when you get down to that point it all evens out. So that's the way I like to do that. Let's just take a quick look back as to what we have. And so we covered real quick on doors. If you remember with doors, deciding on the material that you want those made out of, whether it be wood, steel, stone, door types, are the doors locked or unlocked, and how hard are the locks to get past. And then at that point, your monsters, how many, what kind, the percentage you're going to see them, and how many are you going to see in that particular area of the dungeon. Then of course the dungeon movement tables, how are the dungeon floors affected? Are they muddy? Are they flooded? Does this dungeon particularly have a lot of damp air to it that produces its own fog? And the fog at that point presents its own unique challenge to your characters because they're in a subterranean area that's dark, but it's also very foggy as well. It can cause more disorient them is the word I'm looking for a little bit more. Or do they have loose gravel that makes a lot of noise and they walk around? Or are they at that point in an area to where there are underground lava flows that are running through? And there's a chance that if they get too close to some of these areas at that point, it could burn them. Or is it ice as they're walking through? Maybe they're in the northern areas of your world, and at that point in this subterranean area, they're finding some areas that have permafrost that are iced over. Or are they just on muck, where every step is a challenge, and as they move through this, it's just slowing them down, bogging them down. Now, you don't have to use this. You could just say this is the dungeon and it's just a floor. The reason why I like to add this in is it just adds a little bit more depth into everything, and adds a little bit more of a challenge and makes everything a little bit more enjoyable. And then of course the light source. Where is the light source coming from? How bright is that light, and how much area is it actually going to illuminate in those areas? So you get a better idea of what's illuminated and what's in shadow. And obviously in those shadow areas can always help, not only for your characters, because they can use the shadow to their advantage to be able to do a surprise attack on any encounters. But of course that can also work for the encounters as well. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Oh, and the traps, went through the traps. And in the next video, because broke it down into how to set the parameters to at that point to start occupying the dungeon. In the next video, I want to talk about running the dungeon, having all your random tables with you to be able to run it nice and smoothly, how I do that. And I'm going to give you some suggestions on some books that you can use to help aid you with all this if you're looking for some source material to help you with that as well. Alright guys, this is going to end it for this video. I hope this has helped. If you like this video, give me a thumbs up. And if you have not subscribed, please click the subscribe button, click that little bell icon, and you will be notified every time I upload a new video. Alright guys, I'm going to end it here, and I'm going to get working on the next video.